The temple begins to collapse, so Yue uses spatial magic to teleport them away, but a giant wave washes them underwater where they see that the legendary Tit's head have returned. It begins to attack and Hajime comes up with a plan to beat it, but he needs time. Tit's head evolves into the Great Swallower, but many fishes suddenly attacks the monster as the fugly fish arrives on the battlefield to lend a fin. While Hajime completes his missiles, then launch them inside the monster to turn it into fireworks and brings an end to the Great Swallower. The next day, Miu goes into Hajime's room to wake him up along with Yue, who seems to have misplaced her clothing. Everyone gathers to have breakfast around the table and Hajime decides to leave, but he can't bring himself to tell Miu the bad news. They go outside to play tag with Miu and she runs away to take home field advantage by hiding in the water. But when Shea goes to check on her, she gets a surprise as Miu steals her heaven holders. Rimiya goes over to thank Hajime for taking care of her daughter and tells him that Miu will understand when he decides to go without her. Hajime says he'll tell her that he's leaving tomorrow and Rimiya gets closer to show him why she's the throat goat, but his harem sensed the danger and came to put an end to it. Miu suddenly returns to give Hajime Shea's top, so the rest of his harem decides to donate their milkshake carriers to a noble cause as well. Later in the day, Miu gets the news that Hajime will be leaving soon, but she takes it like a champ and says that she'll wait for him, so he promises that one day he will come back with all his friends and introduce them to her. The next day, Miu gives the entire party good luck charms to keep them safe and Miu embraces Hajime in a hug before he leaves her behind to continue his journey to return home. We go over to the demon capital where we find Fried giving a speech to his army of monsters and begins a mass invasion of all the territories that humans have claimed for themselves. Inside the Knight's commander's office, he begins questioning why his soldiers have been acting suspicious and write letters asking Hajime for help. He hears a knock at the door and Daisuke enters the room to tell him something important. He starts to act very nervously as another knock comes at his office and the commander opens the door to find that one of his soldiers have been brainwashed. The knight goes over to divide Daisuke by two, but the commander manages to hold him off and begins casting magic. He gets stabbed in the back as Daisuke reveals that he's a rat bastard. The commander questions why he betrayed him and summons a tornado to blow everyone off. He tries to slay the traitor, but the knights come in to protect him, so the commander begins fighting a 4v1 to style on all his soldiers by putting them down and winning the battle flawlessly. Daisuke gets up from his ass beating and revives all the guards that were defeated before calling the rest of the knights to start flooding into the room. Seeing no other option, the commander decides to make a strategic retreat through the window and gets ready to blast them, but he's stopped by a mysterious woman who uses a spell to take the remainder of the commander's life points. We head over to our party traveling on the road, but they come to a stop because they see a group of people being attacked by bandits. The barrier around them begins to break apart and Hajime puts the harem carrier into gear so he can channel the American spirit to give the bandits a few extra holes in their bodies. They come to a stop so Kaori can go over to heal all the injured people that fell in the battle. It's revealed that it was the princess who created the barrier and she is introduced to Hajime, but he questions why she's all the way out here and she reveals that the kingdom is in trouble. They take her in the harem carrier where she explains that after they left with Kaori, the king suddenly started supporting the Holy Church and labeled Hajime as an enemy of God. But he started to see her as an enemy as well, so she went to seek out the teacher and saw when she got kidnapped by a nun from the church. After seeing all this, she decided to run away and seek them out to ask for help. Hajime tells the princess that he'll go save his teacher and send anyone that gets in his way to the Shadow Realm. The teacher sits in her cell while thinking about the god of Riz, so the heavens answer her prayers and send Hajime to rescue her. He opens a hole inside the prison and goes inside to take off the bracelet that the wardens attached to her. The teacher goes over to Hajime and tells him that she now knows why he had to smoke his classmates and thanks him for saving her. But he says that he made his own decisions, so she shouldn't blame herself for anything he does. They hear an earthquake in the distance and Hajime notices that an army of demons has begun attacking the capital. A flash of light comes towards them, but Hajime teleports away before they become past tense. The mysterious woman reveals that she is God's strongest apostle and has come to remove Hajime from this world, but he's ready for all the smoke. We go over to our favorite harem where they realize that the demons have started to attack the kingdom, so Yue and Shea decides to go out to deal with Fried because of what he did to Hajime. They go over to Tio and ask where the dragon commander is hiding, but Hajime contacts the horny dragon and asks her to come over to take his teacher to safety. A portal opens that obliterates the tower they were standing on, and Freed joins the battle to face off against them. He commands his Blue Eyes White Dragon to attack, but Yue uses her Reverse Uno card to give his soldiers a one-way ticket to heaven. Yue begins taunting Freed, so he decides to take her in a 1v1 while the Flying Penguins deal with Shea. He uses Tackle on our furry friend, and she decides to use spatial magic to kidnap all her future victims. The demon reveals that the red-haired bad bee they faced in the labyrinth was his lover, and he hates them because they put her on a t-shirt. But Shea explains that it was simply a skill issue and she doesn't care who they smoke to keep Hajime safe. He begins to attack, but the furry uses Future Sight to dodge all their spells and delete them from this world. The demon tells them to start using long-range attacks, but Shea summons a new weapon and comes in like a wrecking ball to knock the mutated penguins into sleep mode. The demon tries to surprise the rabbit with Future Sight and gets balls pushed in his face, but manages to land some attacks to make Shea hard. She uses restoration magic on herself, so the demon goes up into the sky to use lightning attacks and finds out just how OP seeing into the future can be. Shea ends off the fight by bondaging the demon and decides to introduce him to the floor. She flies down to the crater where the demon calls our furry a monster before taking his last breath, but she takes it as a compliment. We go over to Yue, who is facing off against Freed. She calls down a dragon from the skies, but the Gok Gok turtle sucks it in and fires back the spell towards her. Freed says he has prepared for all the bullshit she can pull, but Yue takes it as a challenge and uses all her power to summon the 5 elemental dragons. They begin to deep fry the turtle before slaughtering all the demons that are unfortunate enough to be close by. After seeing the hacks, Freed starts to use his Age of God magic to summon a nuclear bomb to wipe out everything that exists around him. Yue manages to survive that attack, but she gets penetrated by Blue Eyes. She reminds us that she's immortal and uses full counter to make Freed feel unimaginable pain. And he decides to sacrifice his remaining dragon so he can make a strategic retreat back to safety. We find Hajime fighting against Noit while trying his best to protect his teacher. She uses a spell to spit some heat, but the Holy Cross saves them from seeing Jesus. A song begins playing around them that begins to debuff all of Hajime's skills. He points out to Noit that fighting him is pointless because her kingdom is being destroyed by the demons. But she says that her god doesn't really care about the people who worship him. Hajime asks if she could get rid of him by sending him back to his own world. And Noit reveals that she won't do it because her god wants to see him suffer before he takes his last breath. She launches an aura sphere at Hajime that manages to break through his barrier, but Noit suddenly gets her back blown out against the wall as Tio arrives on the battlefield. Hajime gives her his teacher to take to somewhere that's safe while he stays to face off against the apostle. She uses flamethrower again, but he dodges and takes out his Gatling to push her away so he can swap to his sniper to try and put holes in her. Hajime goes in for a no-scope and finds that she's too strong, so he sends the Holy Cross after her, but she easily destroys all of them. Noit uses the Speed Force to get behind our MC and destroys his sniper. Hajime is forced to activate his Limit Break and begins to match evenly with God's strongest apostle. He realizes that if the fight continues like this he will lose and sees that she has a mana crystal inside her body. Hajime calls his remaining crosses to blow away her expectations, but both fighters survive the gender reveal party. He takes the chance to throw some discs at her, but Noit easily deflects them. He surprises her by pewing through the portals until her weapons break apart so he can bondage her with his magic rope. While she is held in place, Hajime uses the Impaler to try and penetrate her body, and with a lot of effort he brings an end to this hard-fought battle. Noit congratulates him on winning before falling down into an abyss to never be seen again. He sees an explosion in the distance and goes over to see that Tio and his teacher are standing in a ruin. They explain that the teacher was trying to boost Tio's magic breath but ended up obliterating the church and sending everyone inside to the gates of heaven. The teacher begins crying, so Hajime goes to embrace her until she starts to feel better. Tio shows them that a monk is watching them and they decide to follow the stranger through the destroyed city. He points at a heap of rubble and lifts it to reveal a magical circle hiding underneath. Our party enters the portal and gets transported to a labyrinth where they begin to explore and step on another magic circle to gain ancient spirit magic. Hajime goes over and finds out that to defeat the dungeon they just needed to have no faith in God. Then he takes the relic of the labyrinth for himself. We go over to Shizuku, who is awakened by a sound outside the castle. She starts to investigate but finds that the rest of her classmates are also on edge. They go over to Aminagua's room and find that they may have interrupted a very special moment. He decides to wake everyone inside the castle to find out what caused the explosion. When a totally not brainwashed maid runs over to report that the demon army is approaching the capital, Aminagawa decides to evacuate the kingdom. However, Eri tells him that it would be better if they meet up with the commander to find a way to defeat the demons. They go to the guard room and is told that they'll soon be meeting with the commander. The captain begins giving a speech to all the soldiers and takes out an orb that turns into a flashbang to signal the knights to begin slaying all the students that are too weak to defend themselves. The maid runs towards Shizuku while asking for her help, but she takes the chance to penetrate her back and pins the best girl to the floor. Eri is revealed to be a traitor and takes off her glasses to prove that she's truly evil. They restrain all the hurt students while Eri goes over to Aminagawa to place a dog collar around his throat. Then the crazy blind bitch attempts to eat his face. Eri tells Shizuku that she did all this to make Aminagawa hers so they can live in this world happily together, but Shizuku questions what happened to the guards. Eri explains that everyone in the castle was secretly sent to heaven and she used her necromancy skill to control them like puppets. She decides to give a demonstration by walking to her defenseless classmate and command the guard to give him an extra hole so she can use her magic to bring him back to this world as her servant. Shizuku calls her a monster, but Eri reveals that she plans to turn her into a servant and force her to smoke Kaori. She takes the sword from the guard and gets ready to make another victim, but a barrier stops the attack and explodes to push her away. Kaori arrives on the battlefield to save her classmates and goes into a trance to cast her spell. The princess defends her from the attacking soldiers, but Daisuke comes over to them and acts like he's innocent so he can get close enough to knock out the princess before going over to penetrate Kaori with his hole maker. The best girl uses her remaining strength to complete the spell and heal all of her injured classmates while her body goes limp. Aminagawa rises up on full demon time and commands his sword to return to him. He uses Getsuga Tensho to distract the guards while the rest of the class begins to free themselves so they can join him in the fight against the traitors. Aminagawa uses another Getsuga Tensho to clear a way to Eri, but he gets blocked by the revived form of the commander. Aminagawa can't bring himself to slay his old friend, so he gets overwhelmed by him. He suddenly begins to feel very sick and Eri reveals that she gave him a little present while she was tongue wrestling him earlier. The crazed bitch begins walking towards Kaori and casts the spell to turn her into a servant. But before she can complete it, Hajime arrives on the battlefield. He flash steps to Daisuke to knock him into the wall, then takes Kaori's body and gives it to Tio and the teacher so they can use ancient spirit magic on their fallen friend. Eri gets Hajime's attention and he begins to walk over to her while on demon time. A servant tries to sneak him, but he blocks it with a barrier and blows his mind. She sends the commander to fight and he asks Hajime to help him, so he sends his friend to the afterlife. Hajime summons his Gatling and begins to send all the lost souls to the gates of heaven so they can rest in peace. He continues walking over to Eri and puts his pure at her thinker, but Daisuke tries to sneak Hajime and gets introduced to the ground. He embraces the traitor's breather and Daisuke blames him for taking Kaori away from him. Hajime decides to test if he has a foot fetish and gives the demons a meal that will surely give them the runs. A giant laser comes from the sky as Freed returns to continue fighting on the battlefield. Tio says that they succeeded in attaching Kaori's soul, but they need Yue to help finish the process. So Hajime summons an orb and uses it to call down a laser that begins to annihilate all the demons that have gathered around the stadium. He tells Freed to leave before he decides to turn him into his next victim, and seeing that he's outclassed, Freed takes Eri to make a strategical retreat. Yue and Shea arrive on the battlefield and see that Kaori has been gravely injured, so they take her body to a better location to complete the healing ritual. Hajime comes over to check on them, but Yue tells him that his teacher is grieving. He goes over to her and apologizes for sending another of her student to heaven, but she says that she accepts that what he did was the right thing to do. Hajime tells his teacher to never stop mourning for those who are lost and keep her humanity intact, so one day when they return home she can teach him how to be normal again. She goes over to him and cries for all her students that perished in this world at such a young age. We go over to the stadium and finds Hajime Nagumo finishing his training. The princess comes over to him where it's revealed that her father passed away during the chaos. She looks up in the sky and finds that our main party has returned to them, but Shizuku realizes that Kaori is missing. Hajime prepares them for her new appearance as they see her falling from the sky while asking for Hajime to catch her, but he allows Kaori to have an intimate moment with the floor. It's revealed that her soul is in Noin's body and Shizuku begins to leak tears of joy while going over to embrace the friend she thought she lost. They asked why she looks so different and Kaori explains that although they were able to completely heal her body, she chose to take Noin's vessel because it was way more powerful. Hajime decides to explain to them all the secrets he found out about this world and the corruption of its god. Hajime Nagumo decides that they need to defeat the god to save the world, but Hajime tells him that all he wants to do is find a way to go home. Our party goes inside to have dinner but finds that the rest of the class has come to join them. They begin asking Hajime if they can come along with him to the next labyrinth so they can learn ancient magic to gain enough strength to defend themselves and save the people of this land. After giving it some thought, he agrees to take them along with him, but Yue realizes that he wants them to get stronger because he can use them as meat shields. His harem begins to feed him dinner and he's forced to eat everything they decide to put in his mouth. Kaori starts getting off from eating from the same fork as Hajime, but Tio is approaching her peak from licking it. She demands a reward from Hajime for all that she did to protect his teacher, and he decides to grant her one wish. Tio tells him that she wants him to penetrate her back like the first time they met, but he refuses to do it. All his classmates begins judging Hajime for what Tio described happened and starts thinking that he's a pervert, so he decides to do as she wishes and summons the impaler to penetrate her just like she wanted. The next day, everyone gathers outside the castle to take on the labyrinth in the forest and follows our party as they set out on a new adventure.
Like for a cat girl, subscribe for a waifu, and remember to stay swifty.